Welcome to the Recombination Nation podcast. This is the rebirth of the Zero Input Agriculture podcast, and I'm back recording the second year of interviews. Today, I have a person who has been following my writing for quite some years, and every time I see a little message or email from him, I absolutely know that there's going to be something interesting and informative and helpful coming right back at me because my guest today is Bruce Steele. He is what I would describe as one of the few experimental primitivist farmers out there who is walking the walk as well as talking the talk. He has a wealth of practical experience growing crops in, you're in the western US around California, I believe.
Southern California,
Southern California.
close to
Beautiful,
San Juan.
beautiful part of the world. So yeah, rather than me try and guess and plumb my memory for all of the many interactions we've had in the past, I'll throw over to Bruce to introduce himself and tell us more a bit about how he ended up on this particular path in life.
Well, hi Shane. Thanks a lot for the invite. Yeah, I guess for most of us who garden, we have some sort of a romantic connection. And my family was farmers in Southern California for five generations, clear back into the 1860s. And they farmed dryland lima beans. And well, as a kid, the horse barn was still there, and the tack was still there, and the thrashing machine and the lanterns that they used to run day and night. It was all there, but the horses were gone
Hmm.
and had been replaced by oh, diesels and stuff. So I had this kind of long connection to farming, but then I think like a huge number of us, we have a romantic notion of grandpa's farm, but then by the time it was my generation, there was no farm, and it took me a while of working in my life to finally be able to buy one again. But
Hmm.
my wife and I have a farm, like I say, hour north out of Santa Barbara and in the Santa Ynez River Valley with riparian water rights.
Hmm. Yeah, you definitely need to be in a fairly luxurious position these days to be a peasant.
Yeah, it's kind of a irony, isn't it? That
Mm.
and that land is so incredibly expensive that even if you can afford it, what's the chance that that would be a pursuit you would choose? I mean, it's mm, unlikely.
We're very unlikely people, but there's a few of us around, and it's a really great opportunity to get to know more of them and figure out how they're solving problems in their own way. So, do you want to tell us a bit about where you're growing? What's the space like?
Sure. Yeah, I guess basically I have more land than is necessary for the kind of primitive techniques I use. Um, so for this year, I also forage quite a bit, and I have pigs. So the pigs are not regenerative at all. They're dependent on barley from a long way away
Hmm.
and a lot of transportation costs to get them to market. But the gardens itself, this year I collected 500 pounds of acorns, and I have 50 pounds of wheat that I've grown and thrashed and winnowed and dried and put away in containers. And um, I have right now, I actually have a market, a farm stand going and some restaurants. So I've been picking super sweet corn and selling. I have 1,200. I count ears. I've sold 1,200 ears of corn, and then this is all in a space of say a half acre that um, I haven't had any fossil fuel tractor, gas or diesel out on it in 3 or 4 years at
Hmm.
least. And I have a small electric tractor that maybe once a year I can get out and in the spring and kind of shallow till, but mostly everything is all done with a hoe. So a half acre with a hoe, and then the production I mentioned earlier, along with, the standard winter garden of carrots, onions, potatoes, all the brassicas. Um, and then also right now, I think I have three gallons of dried cassoulet beans because a lot of what I do, I'm trying to put together staples. I mean, you talk about that a lot, but
Mm.
if in gardening, a lot of our gardening, traditional garden, I call it English garden, that's not really right, but all the things that most people grow in a garden are not the things that create the calories and things you need for long-term storage. And kind of my raising pigs. A lot of things in my life kind of circle around, but pigs really teach you a lot about both nutrition, the kind of that balance between carbohydrates and proteins, but almost everything a pig eats based on dry foods. So,
Mm.
um,
You're in a really interesting position to, like, you've got a visceral understanding of the difference between vegetables, which are like so much water, such a pain to handle and store, versus staple crops, where, like you mentioned, like 25 pounds of wheat that you've dried down this year, that a less experienced person would look at that compared to like 25 pounds of pumpkins, which is so much easier to grow and produce, and it looks so impressive compared to the wheat, but it's like 90% water and inedible fiber. And like vegetables are lovely, but I don't know. Do you want to say something more about that? Like how did you or other people respond to seeing the output of your staple crops versus vegetables that they're more familiar with?
um, I don't know how people react. That don't. I guess I do know how people react. It's like yourself. If I have a PhD over to my farm, and I have several friends, mostly from fisheries associations, but they come by the farm, and then I show them everything, invariably it's you're crazy in a kind of a what the last scientists say it's admirable, but nothing I really want to do.
Hmm.
So staples, it just I get kind of getting back to what my relatives were. We grew dry land beans,
Hmm.
and it's full on staple. And a lot of my farming really that I'm having to kind of break some of these habits. It was in California, we get these winter rains, and that's all the rain you're going to get. So when spring comes, you have a nice garden, you can go like crazy. And then generally, you put some irrigation to it. And then by this time or late into summer, you just let it all dry up and kind of give it up for the year. Come spring, when you have moisture, you can reincorporate everything into the soil and get going again. But
Mm.
it is just, I, when I've figured out right away, it's just terrible on the soil. Like you
Mm.
can't let your soil go through that drying process because you just lose all the carbon. It oxidizes and away it goes. So I have more recently been trying to irrigate all the time, which is giving me, well, I have a, it gives you a lot of weeds, right? You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
it's just when you're trying to keep up a half acre or more by hand with a hoe, it'll catch you. We, some reason this time of year it tends to catch you, but I'm just go ahead and irrigate it anyhow now. So I think the it has really made a difference in my soil. So I keep irrigating, I hoe it in, and then I add compost on top and keep going. I'm finally starting to see a difference of what I've been looking for in my soil for a long time.
Mm. Mm.
And and when you let it dry, all your worms, just a whole host of things that just kind of go away. Whereas if you can just keep it damp all the time, yeah, it's just better in this kind of soil.
Have you looked to the really old Mediterranean style of farming where there was interplanting of perennials with annuals, so that when you hit the dry part of the year, you don't have like 20 acres that just of like annual beans that just completely dies and vanishes and leaves nothing contributing photosynthetically to the soil. Like there would be quite tightly spaced strips of annual grains grown between olives or coppice for firewood or hedgerows. Do you think that is something that could potentially work in your conditions?
I've been planting quite a few oaks, but I'm designing them more as a canopy.
Hmm.
Um, well, just a certain area, like an area that I really don't have a lot of control over, or it's steep, or there's reasons that it's not easy, it's not flat. So I just cover it with oaks. And I follow some of the other threads where you talk about maybe copacine between crops or your ice cream beans or things like that. But I don't know. It's just, hmm, I just, I don't know. Maybe I haven't gotten there or made it work yet, but no, it just seems so much easier. And if you see old style ag, it's just a nice long straight furrow. It's with a hoe, it's not super important, but I do play around with small electrics and just having a nice long furrow is so- it's just so handy, Shane. I know if
Yeah.
you put trees in between, okay, but that you could do the same thing.
Mm.
It but no, I haven't got there yet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have something in common, I think, that your part of the world doesn't have a pre-European agricultural tradition. It was a part of the US that I don't think maize had spread to
Nope.
before the Europeans got there. So it went through a similar kind of wrenching transition into rapidly industrializing Western style agriculture.
No, and I'm going back the other direction. I mean, we have enormous acorn resource. I'm going to call it a
Mm,
resource. It's just it's virtually unlimited, and I've followed oaks and acorns enough years that um, they're really dependable.
mm,
Almost every year you get some sort of a crop off the acorns. And so the way I've been thinking is pick a whole lot of them, dry them, store them. That's like the foundation of my carbohydrates. And it happens in January. So very early in the season, I kind of know whether I have enough, ostensibly to get through the year. And
mm,
and
mm.
hardcore conditions, my wife and I can survive on acorns. We've done it.
I want to
So
I want to hear more. Let's dive into oaks and acorns. So tell me more about what you've managed to do with them, because they're not a straightforward crop to consume. So there's like efforts on that side. And you mentioned something about planting them. So are you doing any are you moving in the direction of selective breeding, I think would be the right way to say for such a slow growing genetically complex species.
yeah, you know, it's I thought about it and I'm thinking it is possible to graft oaks together.
Hmm.
And I'm an old man already, but there are oaks I would be really interested. Especially, I stick to kind of live oaks because we can
Hmm.
the not deciduous ones, but so a holm oak from Europe is a live oak. Well, our coastal oaks are live oaks, but they have a huge tannin content, which I'd like to avoid if I could. But there's a oak in Arizona that I've bought as trees. And so what I would like to do is graft um, the holm oak together with it's called the ebony oak. And the holm oak I favor. It's not native here. But the difference is, Shane, with a holm oak, you can plant it on a grass lawn and irrigate it. Whereas our native oaks, if we irrigate our native oaks, we'll kill them. They really need to dry out in the summer. You'll get a lot
Hmm.
of root rot and problems with them. They don't want wet conditions. Whereas a
Yeah.
holm oak, it can go year round. So if you could graft on some desert oak limb onto a live oak, and maybe they would pollinate themselves. So I don't know what you get. You're kind of you're kind of setting something in motion that you're not sure
I,
whether it will ever yield. But the oaks themselves, like I say, ease of harvest. They grow themselves. They just need some irrigation. If they fall on a lawn, a mown lawn, I can easily go out in a day with a rake and a dustpan and collect 200 pounds of acorns.
hmm
That's
hmm
and in 3 or 4 days, I can get enough to basically get enough carbohydrates to get the family through for a whole year. Um,
It's such an amazing plant. Can we jump the gun a little bit on my wave a magic wand question for breeding a crop and apply that in a more like nuts and bolts way to oaks? Like if you were like a brain in a jar directing an oak selecting revival program in your part of the world, and you had like 1,000 years to reign over the subjects and tell them what to do with oaks. Like, how would you approach that problem?
well, the I think right now, I think the answer's already there. It's
Mm,
just that the holm oak has this. hmm, It, it has been selected by humans already for thousands of years in its
mm,
native habitat. And the way I understand it is that the holm oaks that are down in the kind of flatlands where it's more fertile and they're spaced out with pasture, that they select towards a sweet oak, so it doesn't have very much tannin in it.
hmm
And then in the hills, the same species is bitter. So I think the work's already been done in Europe. It's just that if they have isolated it, the seed stock isn't here.
mm.
But that would make life a lot easier to just take up the work of somebody else's work that's just been dropped, right?
Yeah.
It's there. All the parts are there. It's just you have to access them somehow.
Do you suspect that the people in California were applying steady selective pressure to their native oak species that they were relying on?
So the Chumash were interesting in that they did kind of have property. So they had property rights over good oak groves.
Mm,
And from my experience, certain trees are just steady producers each year. That tree, you can depend on it. It's going to do good. And maybe 3 or 4 or 5 other trees around will drop something, but nothing like this one tree. So to own that would be a good thing, right?
mm.
Um, and you can even see it where it's weird because the wild pigs run in the foothills around here. And as you're driving, you'll see certain oak trees and they're just rototilled underneath. And most of the oaks, it's not so obvious, but certain oaks, they're just rototilled, and it's because that tree masted, and so that's where they spent a lot of time working on that one tree. Um, but yeah, I really do think Chumash did select, but I'm not exactly what for because the trees they selected for were are native live oak, and they're they're just full of tannin, and it's a weird thing for me. That's a pain in the neck because I have to go through all this process to leach it and get the tannins out. But if you're storing something and you really need it for maybe to keep 2 years of storage, dry
Yeah.
storage,
Yep.
those tannins are the protection, part of your protection against insects.
Yeah, if you don't have plastic buckets and dehydrators that you can plug in to speed up and smooth out your storage facilities, then Yeah, it might actually be a benefit. Um, how difficult is it at the moment to import oak seed from other parts of the world into the US? Have the quarantine
There's,
regulations gotten out of hand there too?
yeah, we could just, I got a letter from the USDA already about that. So,
Ah,
not that particular species, but yeah, it's not like it was. But the 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 holm oaks have already been imported to the United States. I mean, there's literally thousands of them in California. They're used as street plantings in places like Fresno, and
mm,
um, they're a lot around. So what I don't have, Shane, is what I'd like to do. What I would like to have is just a hand test kit, like you can test your grapes for your bricks with put a
hmm.
little drip. I'd like to have something where I could test tannins, without
Ah.
having to chew on it.
That's the thing with tannin. Like once you've tasted a high tannin nut or fruit, you're kind of done for the next few hours. You couldn't really accurately say much about the next one on the testing line.
So So anyhow, but like I say, there's certain trees that produce better. I taste them. I think there's a slight difference between some of the fruit on different trees, but I really would need to be more systematic and scientific about it. But I
Mm,
think
mm.
I think the genetics are already here because why would anybody selectively just pick the trees out of the foothills and not in down in the valleys,
Yeah.
I think your chances of getting both are fairly good.
I'm thinking back. I know in the past in the US, with like in the 1800s, with selective breeding, there were various widely publicized competitions in newspapers. Like if you have a local pecan or persimmon tree that is exceptional, enter the competition, and like they were trying to look for the best germplasm that already existed. And I wonder if something like that could happen again, but rather than just a competition for like the best variety if a if a person was planting a grove of oaks, for example, there could be a network of people who have exceptional trees and regularly collect the seeds that go into a central store and then get distributed and mixed so that people planting a new grove can have access to that diverse but partially selected germplasm.
And you have to be maybe you would need to decide what you wanted. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but in general, though, whole milk is really easy. I can get them leached out in a little over a week. And
Hmm.
our native oaks, I'm probably closer to 20 days.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just so easy, Shane. I mean, I have a little tiny, there's a guy who makes a nut cracking machine. It's a little hand mill that you can, so you dry the nut acorns, then you put them through this machine, which breaks the shells off, and you select out the meats, and then you soak them overnight like you would dry beans to kind of soften them and put them in a blender and make say a cornmeal mush. And you can do like 8 or 10 jars that have 2 cups of meal in each one. And it really, yeah, I mean, it's just so dang easy. It's just one of those things you need to have some of it stuffed away in the refrigerator all the time. And then it's like corn. Once it's processed, you can bring it out and turn it into flour or however you want to utilize it. But I'm kind of lazy. I just kind of, once it's been leached, I leave it in the fridge in water, and I could just take a big spoon if I'm making bread or pancakes, or I've been making sourdough lately. So I make a sourdough loaf with acorns and a little rosemary, or acorns and amaranth flour. But those are all um, just ways to incorporate acorns into um, kind of a standard diet where you
Uh,
you'd be hard pressed to know they're there. It's actually improves things a little.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you're using like sourdough starters. Now, I know from personal experience when you're detoxifying a food, it's often the last little bit of residue that takes a disproportionately long time to get like the last noticeable traces out. Have you noticed that fermentation can help with that process? Like you could save the last 3 days of soaking and changing water if you had a ferment that could do that job on a useful scale.
Well, I could do the experiment easy enough because all you'd need to do is just because you can keep your sourdough ferment in a refrigerator, so you could
Mm.
make a some sort of a make a dough up with your acorn in there, and it's in a sourdough, and put it in the refrigerator a couple days.
And
Uh,
it's another one of these things. There are banks of like fermentation microorganisms that, researchers have collected that someone who's interested in this could get a source of acorn flour and then do like a research project to see if any of those strains are particularly good at breaking down the residual tannins.
I'd like to break this the kind of segue, not totally out of this, but just
Mm.
while it's in my mind that, and it has to, sorry, gets back into, I was watching one recently where you're talking to some people about some human pig. Anyhow, anyhow, pigs are in the world, almost all pigs have genetics that comes from China.
Hmm.
That in Europe originally, pigs were domesticated in, say, the and then when the Straits of Bosporus broke, the Black Sea filled just about at a walking pace, and it just forced all those farmers out of the Black Sea. So they walked up the Danube and they brought their wheat, but they also brought their domesticated pigs with them. And the teeth of those pigs are still left in midden piles and stuff.
Hmm.
And then they could watch the progression as these people took them time to get farther and farther into Europe. But as they did, the teeth of the pigs start to change to become more and more genetics of European boar. And the reason being, well, when a wild boar breaks in with your sows,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
still going to have babies, but also that the thing that they were actually bringing was the human knowledge of how to domesticate. So
Hmm.
they were selective breeding their animals. But anyhow, this story goes that there are now very few of the original European genotype pigs left because they've all been interbred. But you have Iberico and the mangalitsa, mm, are these kind of residual genetics that go clear back to Roman times that
Hmm.
never got the Chinese genetics introduced, and they're lard hogs.
Hmm.
So there was a study done by a guy, researchers in Serbia, where this actually the mangalitsa originally came from. The genetics came from Serbia and Hungary. But they did research that showed that if you incorporated tannins into the diet of a mangalitsa, it would genetically trigger that pig to incorporate more intermuscular fat into their meat.
Oh,
And they did
wow.
a study side by side with a standard pig and a mangalitsa, and the standard pig there was no response at all, but they could see that it was almost an 8% change in intermuscular fat, which is a lot.
Interesting.
So, um,
And it's
so
worth pointing out too that tannin isn't just a simple poison. It's not just cyanide that's in the food, and it has complex effects on digestion and microbiome and metabolism at
it's a
varying concentrations, and it's a mixture of lots of different molecules. It's not just one thing.
It's just one of those things we just don't know anything about.
Mm.
I swear, we just don't know anything about it, Shane. But I think n humans probably would benefit by some incorporation of tannins, and
Hmm.
I'll just say that kind of broadly. But but with it so this study that they used, what the tannin they used was they literally in Slovenia they take whole chestnut trees and they shred them and they steam them, then they extract the tannins and they dry it and they make this powder. And now in the dairy business, to prevent scours in your calves,
Mm-hmm.
if you feed the mother a certain percentage of tannins, then the babies don't get scours anymore. And I sent away and bought this pretty ridiculously expensive stuff, but I knew at least it was proven. So I incorporated that into my pig herd for years. And from when I did that, I never had a case of uh, coccidiosis in any baby pigs after that.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
it changes their gut flora somehow, or it makes them healthier because when you're just feeding something like corn or soy or barley, you can imagine the tannins are pretty weak.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's the impression I get, that it slows down protein digestion, which in really high doses can starve the organism of nutrients that it needs, but in moderate doses it can actually even out. It's kind of like the opposite of ultra processed food, where the nutrients just hit your digestive system all at once and cause problems with that kind of shock. When there's tannins in the mix, it kind of just buffers out the highs and the lows of nutrient availability.
Yeah, unless you so to get back to the pigs that have a genetic trigger, you think, and
Mm,
I don't know, this is pure speculation, but you imagine a pig that lives in a forest and the mast falls in the acorns are in the fall. And when as soon as pigs start eating that, it triggers them to put fat on because winter's coming. I mean,
yeah,
it seems
yeah.
like a perfect adaptation to that environment. Whereas in the summer, if you're a pig, you don't really want to be walking around with whole piles and piles of fat,
Hmm.
it make you hot and uncomfortable. So anyhow,
Mm,
and interestingly enough, that they do use these pigs as kind of to study obesity in humans. That
hmm.
what is it that triggers this kind of why are these pigs so obese? Or those are questions that relate to human health, like other things that humans and pigs have in common.
Mm, mm. We should probably leave some time to talk about the other crops that you work with. You mentioned that you produce your staple grains, some of your staple grains, low tech by hand. So, do you want to tell me what that journey has been like? Because I think you've pretty much succeeded with what you set out to achieve.
Yeah, well, maybe I was wrong earlier. I have 50 pounds of cleaned wheat right now. Last year I did buckwheat. I've worked with barley, but I think part of what mm, the lessons for me have been is modern wheat is amazingly productive,
Hmm.
and that it's also incredibly easy to process. And I've experimented with things like spelt or hulled oats, and there's a monster. Anyhow, anyhow, spelt's hard enough where you have to be able you have to get the hull off of each grain.
Hmm.
So that's a whole step above just threshing your grain and a little pile there, throw it in the air and winnow it. Instead, you have to go over onto a mat and then you have to rub it around in circles, and it's a process and it's slow. So grains are not all created equal. Right now, I did get a hullless oats I'm working with, but still pretty slow go compared to something like a big old giant red durum grain. The size of the grain, how many of them actually need to be dehulled. Even in something like red durum, there's a few in there that you still have to go through effort to dehull. But so the choice of grains important. Productivity also, say red durum, you need some fairly good fertilities and it'll hold up to it. So if you put it into a garden setting that you've taken good care of, you get enormous crop, but it's short, so it won't fall over. And if you take the same dirt and you put in a spelt or 8,000-year-old grain that the spelt grows up like 6 feet tall or something, and then it wants to create a head, but it also uh, wants to fall over. So
Mm.
um, some things you really are like kind of low fertility, and other things, modern grains can handle it. So, I mean, it's like any other vegetable crop, right? Each one of them, you kind of have to learn its personality. And also, I've worked quite a bit with amaranth,
Hmm.
which goes more towards those sort of things that
Can
you've
we can we
incorporated.
can we talk wheat and then we'll jump onto amaranth because I want to dive into it in detail. A couple of questions. The difficulty in processing some of the older grains, does that have does that impart any beneficial qualities to the crop, similar to the tannins and the oaks? Are there some upsides to these older crops being more kind of wrapped up in their husk?
Yeah, one. If you get obliterated by birds, there's some spelt left.
Yeah, yeah. I
So,
wondered.
so I've been through that. But uh, so as a backup crop, it's great. And also the good thing about it, I think, is it's self-seeding.
Hmm.
If you have a spelt crop and you don't do a very good job of harvesting it and it just falls on the ground, you don't really even need to turn the ground or anything. It's just going to come back next year. It wants to go wild,
Hmm.
um, which, you know, depending on who you are, whether you want that or not. But I kind of like crops like that want to go wild.
Me too. I wonder if some of the early farmers, the kind of genetics of their crops, all they really had to do was take a parcel of land that was fertile enough to grow a forest, cut the trees down, and then the grass did the rest. Like it did most of the rest of the work. It
For a
basically
while.
invaded and dominated that opening in the landscape.
Well, it would, you know that, right? If you did cut down trees, too many trees for whatever reason,
Mm,
your grass is definitely going to be take over.
mm. And yeah, you just need to find a strain of grass that's symbiotic with the humans that are chopping the trees down, that it's actually encouraging them to do it on its behalf.
Well, you'd be basically pulling the grain from the hills down into the flatlands, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, yeah, that huh.
I also had a question about your intuitions about the scalability of staple crop production. So you mentioned the modern wheat does really well in like a vegetable garden, high fertility, high control environment, but given how much you've done like hand farming and gotten a sense of like how much land a person has to manage to produce their own calories, do you feel like there's like a trade-off there? Like if you tried to make a large enough area fertile enough for the modern wheats, it may not be feasible if you were doing it just with like low technology inputs, whereas some of the more robust grasses have the right balance of vigor and productivity that you could scale them up to a sufficient scale to actually do the job with
I
very
think,
primitive tools.
yeah, well, yeah, it's crazy how productive. I got 50 pounds of wheat on just a little over 1,000 square foot of garden.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I garden just with a hand, just by hoe. I keep maintain 4,000 square feet. And then there's other area where I put cover crops. And then, like I said earlier, once a year I'll come through and hit it with a tiller,
Hmm.
which, I can use more land like that. But it's like Samuel Lewis said, it's really not that hard to do this stuff. It
Mm.
really is. And I'm by no means utilizing all my time out there gardening. It's just I, it it's not hard to do. And I guess that depends on if you have the water and what kind of soil you have and whether you have supply of compost, or all those things play in. But if you can garden then, moving on to staples, I don't think it's that hard, other than, again, I live in a Mediterranean climate, so processing is a huge part of this thing, that I can be lazy and wait to harvest, and then I can be lazy even when the wheat's over on the threshing floor because I'm not going to get rain. Whereas a lot of
Yeah.
people, they're in a different world where the rain is going to really mess their world up.
Yeah, that's my world of pain if I don't get the harvest like done to the hour sometimes, and then the processing done meticulously, then it's very easy to lose all of your results to storage problems.
But I've tried to think of that like most people think, okay, how many pounds of wheat do I need? How many pounds of corn do I need? And how many pounds of potatoes? And then they think these is how many calories I need in a whole year. But like I said earlier, I'm completely different. I start the whole year with acorns, where I'm just certain that I'm fine, and then from then on, each crop is not the same pressure.
Mm, mm.
If you were in the situation where this was critical, that cushion, or even acorns will store for 2 or even 3 years if you were hard pressed.
Yeah.
To put something away like that, so then your other projects, which come and go and have failures and successes, are not. You're not just grinding you're not really worried about it. Each one is your season goes like it goes. It's just nice to have that kind of backstop.
And I actually think this is what the picture of traditional agriculture was in most parts of the world. Like in Europe, chestnuts and hazelnuts and other species that would be semi-managed, semi-foraged would be a decent chunk and a fallback if the grain crop failed. And it's probably only with increasing population density and mechanization and complexity that the percentage of grain in the diet actually steadily crept up, particularly in flat lowlands where it's very easy for people to chop all of the trees down for firewood and then be like, oh, what do we do now? We have to like bump up to 70% of our diet coming from grain.
The other part of that being pigs is that if you have this huge staple crop, when it's 2 years old and you decide, I'm not really going to get to it, you just chuck it to the pigs and they're
Yeah,
perfectly happy with it. So
yeah,
there's no waste in it. And then also kind of gives you this, once you have pigs in your diet, you really don't want to grow grain for them. Believe me, a ton of grain is something that nobody wants to take on. So
yeah.
you want your forest still, right?
Mm.
That's part of making the whole thing work. I don't happen to have that, but in places in the world where they had pigs and wheat and stuff, I'm sure they kept those pigs really locked up good in the summer when they could get out into their grain. But come
Hmm.
fall, when everything's kind of, yeah, when the oaks are dropping and they don't have anything in the field anymore, they turn them loose.
Yeah, yep, yep, yep. Yeah, those different rhythms and ways of using livestock in the landscape. I mean, it's so different today where everything has to be fenced obsessively to stop animals wandering, onto a road and causing an accident or into the neighbor's place and causing a feud between people. I thought as well, the importance of an agricultural package, as it was called. Like if you just have wheat as a tool for civilization on its own, it can do very, very little. But if you add in a dried staple legume and a tree crop and a couple of complementary animals, the combination of all of those is more than the sum of its parts in the way that they combine and like leverage off each other. But I also wonder if once you have a functional agricultural package, the pressure to like improve or domesticate or add new species into the mix drops off very rapidly. And I wonder if that's why there was like a big burst of domestication in the early part of civilization, and then it kind of slowed to a crawl in more recent years. And I'm hopeful that we can change the culture around that, that we can I don't know, have a bit more of imagination about where efforts to bring new species into the fold could lead in a relatively short period of time.
Which kind of the amaranth is one of those things that around here is, oh, it's called red root amaranth, but most farmers just hate this stuff, and it's learned to be Roundup ready.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But it is such a great grain. I just love this stuff. And then any other amaranth I plant, they interbreed. It's not like I'm planting it. They have their own way of doing things. And it's funny, Shane, that you could put out, so red root amaranth has a little black seed, but the flower itself's just kind of green and yellow, dull, dull tan. And all the bright red amaranths that grow, whatever, the love lies bleeding, or there's a lot
Hmm.
of different. They will crossbreed, but pretty soon that red root genetics is just taken over. You wait a few years and there's nothing red left. All there is this red root, which I don't, it's when you have something that's so vigorous and so happy, I figure, well, just eat the stuff that wants to grow here. So things like that. Tomatillo is another one. Like I
Hmm.
mentioned earlier, if you, without much work, you could turn spelt into that kind of crop where you encourage them to go to turn to weeds.
Hmm.
Your talk you had with your Ukrainian friend, you've Jen,
You've got it,
uh,
yeah.
I thought it was interesting what he was saying about he and his grandfather, that they had lived in a place in the world that had been overrun by the hordes so many times that they had this deep memory of, no, we need to do these, we need to plant these things because nobody else does, and nobody
Mm.
recognizes them as food.
Yeah,
And
yeah. And
that's
and
kind of
ha
that's
having
kind of
having those wild food resources, well, semi-wild, a distance from your home base that you can leave home for a period of time and not starve is such an amazing culture.
it's a weird thing. And I don't know. I didn't really want to get into the why on things because then, you drive people away. But when you're living in Southern California and there's 24 million people within a tank of gas from you,
Mm,
that, you like, you can't like, oh, whatever. You want to be a hoarder, you want to do whatever you're going to do.
mm,
But ultimately, the you can't turn loose 24 million people and have anything but a disaster happen. So
mm,
what are those things that are just there all the time that are food? It's oaks, it's amaranth, there's just tomatillos. There are just things that grow that if you have enough knowledge, you can get through a tight spot.
yeah. I'm curious to learn a bit more about how you're managing and using these amaranths. So you're taking that wild weedy population and allowing it to intermix with presumably like you've tried various strains of domesticated like Mexican type grain amaranths and then from that mix like tell me what's happening there. Like you kind of hinted at it and I'm suddenly uh honing in on it.
Well, okay, because wild amaranth have really bitty, little teeny seeds, and I finally did figure out how to turn them into flour. It was just one of those a little coffee grinders, like a 1 cup coffee grinder thing. Zip,
Hmm.
zip, zip. So I can turn it into flour, and I use amaranth to make a roux. So for gravies, and also if I'm going to prepare it to put into a sourdough, I put the amaranth into a flour. I usually sift it too. I have a whole host of different sieves I use, but
That
I'll
that
sift
that makes
it.
sense because it's got such a good amino acid balance. It's like one of the most nutritionally complete grains. So in a
That.
roux and in a microbial culture, it would have advantages.
So I make a roux and put water and in the typical way you make a roux with flour, you just put the flour with the butter and bubble it for a while, and maybe create a little nuttiness to it, and then just add some water back, and it'll thicken up. Or if you wanted to, for like gravy for potatoes, you could put milk into it.
Mm.
But it makes a spectacular gravy. But it also, once you make it into the roux and thin it down enough, it just becomes kind of part of your like your liquid component for making breads or stuff.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's also the good thing I find it really kind of fun is it makes purple flour. So it makes
Ah,
purple gravy, or your bread will come out purple, which kind of complements acorns do the same thing. So
yeah.
my sourdough oftentimes is purple.
Cool. Interesting. Yeah, no,
And
that one was worth touching on a little bit more because I've done trials of amaranth here and found a few varieties that perform a bit better, but we have very few wild amaranths growing as weeds, and I think that's a sign that it's never going to be an easy crop here. The soil chemistry doesn't quite suit them.
yeah, yeah, I don't know. There's other things too, like I mentioned, tomatillos,
Hmm.
which are just once you turn them loose, they it just becomes one of those things that, okay, they don't all ripen at once, so you have to traipse around. They usually grow in the corn patch.
Hmm.
So, de milpa actually is their name. And these are little purple ones. And you kind of go through and you find a plant, and then you pick them, um, and then I bring them to the house and add like chili peppers or tomatoes or something, and make a sauce and just put them in the freezer.
Hmm.
But anyhow, it's one of those things that if you pick it, you can store it a while, but it's not like a staple. It's just one of those things that's nice to have seasonal crop.
Yeah, yeah, it's a bonus, and you probably get sick of it if it was available 12 months of the year.
It goes really well with pork.
Oh, yes, yes. We should spend some time talking about your approach to like low input farming, and are there any particular aspects of that you want to dig into a bit deeper?
Well, the way I think about it, Shane, is okay. I came from a farming tradition, where my grandpa had a equipment yard, and he was a really good mechanic. And we kind of get drilled on, okay, you're going to learn where every zert is on this machine, and you're going to know how to keep it oiled and working and clean. I mean, that's all part of as a young kid coming up into a farm family, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, there was this huge equipment yard. And then when grandpa finally went belly, they sold the stuff for like pennies on the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
It was just hard. It's one of those things, it's just so hard on a farmer, to watch everything vaporized like that. But so it left this kind of, again, I have this memory of why I don't have a farm or why I didn't get a farm, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I kind of blame the equipment sometimes, and maybe that's not fair. I mean, people really don't have much choice in these things. But as I think, and everybody who should know by now, that fossil fuels go into a decline, we still have to figure out how to feed ourselves. And we put all this energy into figuring out how to transport ourselves or fly us around with biodiesel or whatever they put wasting their time on. And it's very, very little effort going into how do we feed ourselves on less fossil fuel imports. So let's start with a farm and big equipment. And then I moved down to, okay, I'll just buy an old tractor. Like I ran my farm with an old Massey 35 or something that was as old as I was, but it's the sort of thing you can keep running, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I stepped down to I have an electric tractor that's only 15 horsepower at the PTO. So if you run a tiller, it's really not much more than a kind of a electrified rototiller.
Mm-hmm.
But then a step down from that is, say, I've modified a mini bike to just do cultivating sort of chores. But I think electric chainsaw, little cultivating mini bike, and then the strimmer, a stream. They have they have a head for the end of an electric trimmer
Hmm.
that you can really knock down big weeds that once, once you're starting to look at malva, eye level, you got to have it takes something to really get rid of it. So those tools are, I think of just kind of in energy descent, they
Yes,
took it
yep.
from
And I think we have to be realistic that at this time in history, people who have the land security and the time are very rarely in their most physically vigorous part of their life. Like people in their 20s and 30s, I don't think I know any who have an opportunity to do full-time farming, particularly experimental farming, which kind of by definition isn't going to generate much of an income to
no.
like justify the whole expense. So yeah, for people like us at the later half of our lives doing this kind of work, we have to be mindful that it's very easy to break your body. Like one serious injury or RSI kind of accumulated problem, and you can't even manage things with machinery anymore.
Well, it's always been the case though, and kind of we are supposed to talk about culture too, and we haven't gotten there yet. But
Mm,
so my great grandfather on one side of the family was what I talked about bean farmers. The other side of the family had dairy up in Washington State, and and so he farmed alone like a lot of us do, and got sick and kept milking and got pneumonia and died.
hmm
And then the whole family, right? There were the three boys and his wife, the older sons kind of kept on with the dairy, but everything fell apart, right?
hmm
So even now, like, oh, my wife and I, we we were down at the fruit stand, and sure enough, somebody gave us both COVID here about a month ago.
mm,
So you get knocked down with COVID, you're not going to be out hoeing weeds. I don't care how bad that farm that it's just to me it's not life and death, right? It's a
yeah.
different so, so um and but the culture thing is I have a hard time with it, Shane. So for me, I've run a fruit stand and a farm for 25 years. And in that whole time, there was one young high school girl who was really interested in agriculture and would come by and talk and stuff. And she did get, a degree in ag and works for some big corporate ag
Mm,
business at this point.
mm,
But it's really sad that I have literally thousands of people come drive by on the freeway, goes past my property, and nobody under the age of 25 ever comes.
mhm,
Ever.
mm,
Never. Never. It's just like old people come or people from different countries that still have that romantic attraction, right? It's
mm,
romantic. Oh, your farm's beautiful. Um, so for me, I don't I don't know how to bridge that gap. So what I've been doing lately is I told you I have extra land. So we have, Oaxacan Indians, literally indigenous Indians who still speak Mixtec,
oh wow.
come here to work. So um, when there are people mostly Mexicans. I'll be pretty honest about this because they remember Grandpa's farm. There's a romantic connection to it. And when I find people like that want to farm, I offer them a piece of ground. I say, here's a piece of ground, here's some water. Don't use pesticides, and I hope the ground's better when you're done. But
Yeah.
I don't expect anything out of them. Sometimes they'll kick me a little money back, but I have couple different people have chicken coops, and one of them has a small garden, and then have another group of people. They just planted marigolds because over here on the Day of the Dead in November, you can sell lots of marigolds. So that's all they
Ah,
planted.
yep, yep.
And they don't speak English, so I'm just watching it all like, well, they have a daughter who translates for them, but I'm just thinking, well, not exactly what I had planned, but oh well,
That
you know.
That
You
is
kind
the
of have
most that is the most beautiful story, and I didn't know that about you at all. That is the most beautiful story. But I have a question. Do you feel more comfortable sharing your land with people from that culture because they're less litigious than people from an Anglo-American kind of culture? It's one thing that we are very concerned about, that Australia is almost as bad for people suing each other as like the worst parts of the US. That somebody can, in principle, come onto your property to like in the best of intentions, they can slip over and hurt themselves, and you can suddenly find yourself like involved in a major life-changing lawsuit that, you know, threatens your security. And I
yeah,
wonder if that isn't as much of a factor with the Latino community.
I personally don't think it is as large an issue. But also I trick them, I'm not really giving them heavy equipment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I it's hmm, it's always a risk, all right. But
Yeah.
I'm a farmer. I have livestock on my property, and I think probably the largest risk is if a livestock gets on the road in California, it's my responsibility if they
Yeah.
get hit.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have to carry liability insurance for that. So I have to have a farm policy. And I think, and I'm not certain of this, but when I'm not collecting money from somebody, my legal responsibility is maybe not the same as actually renting a piece of property.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's now, who knows, but it's just not going to look so good in a court of laws. You mean the guy gave you a garden and gave you water and you cut your foot on a hoe and it's his fault?
Mm, mm.
I don't know. It's one of those things. It's just a risk. The same thing having a fruit stand on your property. I don't know. I did such dangerous crap in my life when I was diving sea urchins that I don't know. I just don't worry about risk a whole lot.
Do you think partly what we are trying to do is just a matter of timing in history? So, for example, there was a big back to the land movement in the 70s that almost without exception just fizzled out. And there's a few old timers who hung on from that era, but they're very hard to find. And they were just too early, really. Like the boom of the 80s and all of that was going to be headwinds for people taking that seriously and following through. And I often wonder, like, do you think we might be in a similar state that we're like, you know, 10, 20, however many years early for what we are doing to really capture people's imagination and interest on a broader scale?
Gosh, dang, you're going to get me back into the why. Shane, we are on a target right now to hit CO2 doubling between 2060 and 2070.
Hmm.
That's where we're going. I mean, the world is going to go through such, I mean, just radical convolutions over the next several decades.
And
And
it's like the Black Sea filling in again, but on a global scale.
yeah, yeah, but that's just we're going to get there, Shane. I'm pretty confident we're going to manage to get that 560. So they figure right now a doubling will result in long term something close to 8C.
Mm.
It's not short. We only have maybe to deal with 3 degrees C, in the in immediate term, but long term it's 8C.
Mm.
Okay, once you leave 560 and you start headed up to the 1120 or whatever, then I don't know that there's anything could handle a whole lot more than 8C, my
Mm.
personal opinion. So I mean, what are we really looking at as far as what people can do in the future? All I can think of, Shane, for that future, which is only maybe 100 years out, what will live here? What
Hmm.
will live here with 5 degrees Celsius more than what is currently here? What, and And so I've been trying to plant things along those lines as like Chilean wine palms, things that'll live 200 or 300 years in somewhat arid climates. I think even date palms.
Hmm.
Uh, there's a lot of California that will become date palm that you'll get enough heat that they'll ripen, say in Fresno, which they're already starting. Um, but what can you plant now? Like a black walnut. I have a lot of faith in a black walnut, right?
Mm.
So can I put a black walnut someplace where I think there's a reasonable chance that it'll survive the chainsaws and have some sort of a reasonable water supply to make it to great old age? You
Mm.
know, those are the things I'm trying to do to prepare for whoever's coming in that, let's say look out quite a 2 generations. Be- because I think they're the people that we need to be looking out for. And I don't know anything I can do for what's going to happen in between. But there's a physical reality that's going to come down with enormous stress on how you can feed yourself at all.
Hmm.
So so
Do you think there's an
anyhow,
opportunity to get some of the more tropical Mexican species of oaks into your area as conditions change?
yeah, I happen to live in one of those weirdest places on earth where we really don't expect a huge amount of change here.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure about the Mexican oaks. I don't hear a lot about their edibility. I heard
Yeah.
they're uh, mm, no, I don't know. I developed a small little, I have a weep on my property that I found. So I developed it out so that there's a constant water for like little birds, or I leave a field with certain kinds of weeds that I know produce a lot of seed just for the birds, or
Mm.
it's not just people, right? We got there's a whole host of crap we got to be thinking about what we're trying to preserve something for.
Hmm.
And, and and like I mentioned, modern wheat is so productive. We know so much about soil health now that we didn't know, that if you can preserve that knowledge of what it is you need to, what it is this piece of ground needs, you know, then all the rest is just sweat and labor.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, I mean that we're kind of already in that question, but like, how do you connect with other people and like network the stuff that you're doing? Like you've mentioned that it's rare to find someone who really gets what you're doing, but like, yeah, but do you have other channels that you have used to reach out? Are there any like community networks or organizations that you kind of interact with in your part of the world?
Oh, we have a gardeners group. So it's basically various gardeners or some vintners or people around the valley who have interest in those sorts of things. We just have a potluck once a month and we
Hmm.
all get together and oh, but generally we talk politics more than how we grow things.
Got to get the blood
Um,
pressure up somehow.
and then also because I have a fruit stand, that's like just an open invitation, right? If
Hmm.
you want to talk to me, you just have to drive down the hill, and here I am. And that's how I meet the people who actually want a little piece of land, that they show up because they're interested in the farm.
Mm.
And how do you what how do you what kind of sieve do you use to in the general population to select out those people who are interested? I know there's other people, they have the what's it called? The people that stay on your farm and work.
Oh, woofers.
Wolfers. But I just I hate to encourage I hate to take people's labor for free for one, and I can't really afford to pay. But sometimes it's a weird thing. I almost hate to encourage people to think of this as a way to make money. They
Mm.
really, that's just, oh man, what a, this is a great thing if you worked your whole life and you managed to have a house and sell it and buy a farm as your retirement plan. But working into it Dang, the world's just it's upside down that way, right?
Hmm.
Hopefully something change. And I don't, so Shane, just as kind of an idea of if you're a woman, say with two children, and you have home, babysitting cost you whatever, $1,000 each per month, per child. And then you have to have a car and a driver's license and insurance. And you start adding up just the basic things, what it costs if you're a single mother with two kids. And at what point just moving out onto somebody's property and growing your half acre of food and having your kids that you carry around with you and educate at home. And I mean, when's that break come where they just say, hey, it's just not worth it anymore?
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, on a related note, I think of all of the uh, exuberant energy of children and teenagers, which is being bottled up in classrooms to stare at whiteboards when there's like farming. That's what children used to be for. They used to make farms viable before the tractors and the machinery and the chemicals came along to both take away the opportunity and make those spaces so dangerous that you would never put a child in them again.
I don't know, but how do we get that romantic? How do you get the romantic attachment unless they actually do? And
Mm,
and in the whole valley here, which is like I say, pretty affluent. There is one family over the 25 years, one young couple who took up organic and managed to get, uh, spots at the Hollywood Farmers Market. They made the right connections,
mm,
but they worked so hard. and
mm-hmm.
and really the wife, I go visit him and she'd have her baby strapped on while she's out in the field working.
Yeah.
It was, but she got to, her kids got to be raised by her.
Mm-hmm.
It was a family. Dad was there, the kids were there. I recently saw them, the kids have grown up, and I asked them, well, are any of them going to want a farm? And the response was, yeah, we think one of them will.
That's the trick is how to make sustainability sustainable on a like human scale for like people to be able to keep it up. Like I see a lot of people start those little farm market ventures and burn out physically or emotionally or sometimes just socially, like being away from a population center like a city isn't something they've ever had to adapt to before. And sometimes it can just be lonely.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's having a farm stand's a real can be a real lesson in humility. It it's kind of like farming or gardening in general. Like once you've done it for 50 or 60 years, things crash sometimes. It just like that's how it is. Next year I'll try, and you keep a variety of things, and from experience that you will have some successes and some failures. But a farm stand is something where you're waiting for people to come, and then when they don't, you start questioning yourself. Have I done something wrong?
Hmm.
But really, once you've done it long enough, you realize no, if it's 97 or 98 degrees, they're not going to come. They're just not going to come and get out of their car. They're not going to leave their apartment. Or
Hmm.
there's just, there's other things that contribute to why people didn't come. It has nothing to do with your produce. So I think running a farm stand's difficult because you're really just dependent on somebody else thinking it's convenient.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh, I have a general question that I think I might start throwing out more often. Now you mentioned the people who grow marigolds at your place because it has an enormous cultural significance that makes the whole thing worth doing. And I wonder if you can see opportunities for various agricultural things to be bred and or produced that have a that build up a greater cultural significance in like the common, Anglo culture in your area. That it isn't just a product that you try and get at the lowest possible price and greatest convenience.
Well, you hope people have taste buds, right?
Not
That,
if you're scrolling the internet while you're eating, then you don't even notice.
that, that really, I mean, whether you're a fisherman or a vegetable farmer, you're selling something that you think has quality that makes it worth your time to produce it. And there's some crops. Like I used to do the farm stand with everything, Shane, melons and watermelons and onions and shallots and squash of multiple kinds and multiple heirloom tomatoes and fill the whole stand up. And then that's really can be whatever. I told people they would come in the middle of summer and they say, "Oh, do you have lettuce?" And I go, I think you could go down to the road and get better lettuce than I could produce this time of year. You know,
Hmm.
that just some things that you can't do well because it's whatever, it's just not the right time of year for it. But other things, there's just not enough taste difference to make it worth doing.
Yeah. Yep.
So, so I tried to do crops that I'm proud of or I think have like I pay a lot of money to get that silly super sweet corn seed, which, there's nothing regenerative about it, but I keep a couple other kinds of landrace, more landrace type corns, right?
Mm.
Um,
Well, I guess what
but
I'm trying to say, like that's one strategy you can take is try and engage in an arms race with processed food to create something that's so unique and high quality that you can target it towards a discriminating consumer. And I mean, there's a few of them around, but not that many. But I'm interested in the opposite approach. Like, if you were producing acorn flour, for example, it tastes a bit different to, any other flour you could buy in the shops, but not dramatically different. But if you could frame it as having cultural significance, and I'm thinking of like the communion wafer that you get at the Catholic Church, that doesn't taste like a Twinkie. It hasn't been like amped up to make it, stimulate the senses, but it has a different kind of significance in what it means to that community. And I wonder if you could see something like that happening with oaks.
well, you think about California, we are about half Hispanic now,
Hmm.
and and becoming more so. And there's such a rich tradition, that that and also with climate change, that's what south of us is going to become more viable here. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think you could piggyback on other people's culture and do
Yeah.
fairly well. And um, I, I don't know how to reconstitute. I don't know. I don't know how to turn our culture back into, like I keep saying, things actually taste better. To me, that's worth effort,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
if you grow a field corn and you put it through a mill, just the smell coming off is spectacular and it's really good for about 2 or 3 months,
Yeah.
But if you
Yep.
go to the store and buy corn and bring it home, put it through the same mill, it smells just like chicken food.
Yeah.
It's terrible. It's
Yeah.
the corn itself is just terrible.
Yeah. Yep. And
So
people have been so disconnected for so long. Like it's multiple generations since people have had real live staple crops. Like even the potatoes that you buy in the shop compared to the ones you can grow at home, like they're practically a different species.
yeah, it's and so I guess for my own pleasure, I do what I think tastes good, and it keeps me in like I'm experiment. I like to cook. I like things, you know, to create things like I did fiff rolls, right?
Hmm.
for fizzles, cream puffs,
Hmm.
where I made my own flour from my own wheat, and then I made my own cream puffs, and then a, a I used acorn to thicken up some chocolate. So I filled them with chocolate filling, but everything except the chocolate was produced on the farm. So that's kind of like a cooking challenge to go along, or there's other recipes that I developed that are just, I don't know, they're things that I think taste good, that it's fun to cook. Like cooking is, I think cooking is a huge part of encouraging mm, greater numbers of people to do this. If you make things that really taste good, that's the one thing that that'll click this spot in their head like, oh, I'd like to try this again.
Well, here's a counter position. Imagine you were living like a constrained, industrialized suburban life, and you got to chase like real corn flour once a year. Would it actually make your life worse because now you realize how lifeless the food that you're eating like every other day is? And if you can't actually make that your standard fare, is it actually like psychologically painful? It's like if you get to spend one day in paradise a year, it actually makes living in hell harder because you can't
But
just
none
kind
of
of get used to it.
nothing but your own laziness makes that happen, right?
Mm, mm,
So another thing I did with when I grew this red durum, that when I mill it, I get about 50% fine flour and 50% is kind of seminola with the bran.
hmm.
And I keep that. I use that to make a cream of wheat. Oh my God, it's so good. It's
Mm,
just very simple crops. And I think wheat's another one. Why did they get rid of the bran? Because the bran has oil.
yeah,
Where's the flavor? It's just kind of like, why does that taste good? Oh, it's because the bran is still there.
yeah.
And I think also it's probably has a short window that oil will tend to want to get rancid.
Mm,
But I keep it as soon as I have it milled, I put it in the freezer. But so just simple things like how corn tastes when you mill it yourself, how wheat tastes when you mill it yourself. They're just such simple things that I think they should encourage cooks at the very least.
yeah. Do you think, like in traditional pre-industrial villages, you would often have like one mill that everyone took their grain to because the technical requirements to process it isn't something that well, it's more convenient to do it at a medium scale. And I wonder if you could go back to having something like that, that you have a shared processing facility so that people can, buy the grain direct from the farmer, store it at home, and then process it bit by bit as they need it. Because I think that's often it's the freshness and the perishability of those staple crops once they're being processed is part of the difficulty in handling them.
Yeah, I mean, a shared mill, it's also would be like a hub.
Yeah.
So if we got back to village type conditions, I've gone farther back. So my mill is a saddle mill. So you go clear back to Glodepi Techie.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's the technology I'm using because it's just one human. Um, and also it's dependent on technology without steel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's um I probably will chip out my own honeycomb. I do rock work. It's just one of the things I do.
Hmm.
But
Oh wow.
um I uh I a miller is just one of those people that we've lost, Shane. It's
Yeah.
not it's it's you need to know like what's the ideal moisture content of this grain before I put it through the mill. Um, what kind of sieves do I need, for various crops or, there's just a whole lot to know that it's just one of those things. I suppose you could get it back, but it is not easy to come by anymore.
Yeah.
It's kind of like learn by yourself.
I'm sure I read somewhere that industrial flour mills run so fast and so hot that they oxidize the flour as it's going through the machine. That's another reason they have to strip like most of the goodness out of the grain before they turn it into flour.
What's it mean when they say it's bleached?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. But it's definitely the huge flavor differences when you're dealing with those. So for me, that's happened to be my personal encouragement to do these things. And the chefs and stuff that I work with, that's what for a chef, you want to offer him something that's just off the charts, like, you,
Mm.
you got me more of that, right? That
See,
that
I could almost imagine something like a church that you go to once a week. That's where the mill is. That's where they have a connection to a local grain grower who's actually doing this at a scale. And you get your bag of like fresh flour and get to catch up with all of the neighbors who are, similarly concerned about where their food is coming from.
Yeah, we just have our potluck and I just give them corn on the cob, or what
Yeah,
other people bring whatever they have, it's just kind of like that.
yeah.
But, but, how do we rebuild a village? That, it really, I think the idea of the commons is important
Hmm.
that, that if my farm ever got to be where there was enough people here that they each grew some component part of what would fill a farm stand, and then that they could get again, you get into liability issues, but
Mm.
if the farm actually the people on the farm had a way to sell their products together
Hmm.
and then like you say that there was some just running a simple electric mill would be pretty easy.
Mm.
If you just give somebody a bulk and you tell them you have to take it home and you have to sift it and these steps are for you, but we'll give you this bulk grind.
And
I
and
don't
I,
know. I just
I get a
I mean,
sense that these cultures and traditions and levels of technology are currently in operation in South and Central America, that there's a potential for guidance there.
yeah, I don't know how well my mixed tech's ever going to be.
Um, Oh,
No,
we should probably
I
wrap things up
yeah,
pretty
okay.
soon, but should we finish with the fun question? If you could create any crop by like waving a magic wand or livestock, if you want to branch out into something, if time and resources weren't a barrier, what would you want to bring into the world?
Well, I don't have to bring it into the world, but I'd sure like that corn that makes its own nitrogen. And
Oh
then
yeah,
I put my request out to my Oaxacan friends on a regular basis.
it, it's
That one
it's
intrigues
probably one
me.
of those long season varieties from the equator that grows like 7 feet tall and takes
I,
9 months to produce a cob.
I've grown them. I've grown Oaxacan corn here. So I've grown
Oh.
12, 15-foot corn here, and it had like adventurous roots.
Hmm.
And occasionally you would see that little sap drip. So I think underground it's probably doing it by itself.
Yeah.
It's such a it's such a strange corn to grow because you get like 15 feet tall and the corn's so far up above where you can reach that the only way to get to it is you have to break the corn stalk over and bring the corn to you.
Though,
Um,
though apparently, nitrogen fixation microbes are much more common in plants than we first realized. Joseph Lofthouse has been breeding tomatoes, like restoring fertility to them. Apparently, those plants got analyzed and were found to be fixing nitrogen. So they've actually picked up some kind of symbiont along the way to change how they get their nutrition. So I think it's not. It's one of these things that's probably like right under our noses, and we just weren't noticing it before.
well, if you pull one of these corns up, one of the Oaxacan corn and then just a standard field corn,
Mm.
the root structure is just enormous.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yep.
It's just a different critter altogether underground.
Hmm. Hmm.
So anyhow, that would be my, if I could have a corn that made nitrogen, I would like that.
I think you're going to have to do it. No
Uh,
excuses with that one. You don't want a fire-breathing dragon. You just want a better corn. And corn is one of the crops that's like structurally designed for people to tinker with it.
yeah, that and a sweet acorn would be nice too.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Brilliant, brilliant. Very, very humble but very luxurious dreams. I love it.
Yeah, someday we'll have to talk about the ocean.
Oh yes, yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, yeah,
But we were here for farming, so I really appreciate it, Shane. Thanks for
yep.
taking interest in it.
And do you have any places where people can learn more about your work? Do you have websites or ways that people could get in touch?
Well, you suggested I try it, so I put a Bruce Steele Substack.
Mm-hmm.
I have that, and then also our farm is Winfield with it, WIN, like the gun, Winfield Farm dot US, and then I've been putting up some of my Substack onto our. We have a blog we maintain on there.
Mm-hmm.
But the people, if they want to learn anything about the pigs or the farm, they can get hold of me through that. And I'm up for any time anybody wants to come up and visit me. Just give me a call. It's on the website, and I, I love dragging people around, showing them what I'm doing.
Yep, yep. No, that's a beautiful and very generous offer, and I'll put all the links to that in the show, and hope that gets a few more people interested in what you're doing out there in California.
I'll give them bags of seed they can go home with.
Excellent. Yes, yeah, I do the same. I do the same. Well, Bruce, thank you very much for this amazing conversation, kicking off the second season, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks again, Shane.
Recombination Nation explores how cultural and biological experimentation can lead us to a post-industrial future, one that is more interesting and plausible than either Star Trek or Mad Max. If you want to support my work, sign up to my Substack, where you can read free weekly updates from my experimental farm, book reviews, and deep dives. A paid subscription gives you access to the audiobook of Taming the Apocalypse, a bold survey of the hidden domestication potential across the entire tree of life, plus my archive of over 150 past posts.